Welcome to Essential Dynamics. I'm Derek Hudson. I'm the developer of the Essential Dynamics framework and host of the Essential Dynamics podcast. I'm thrilled to have Mike Palmer back on. Mike, thanks for coming back.
Thank you.
On the podcast, we like to explore principles of Essential Dynamics through deep conversations with interesting people. Mike kind of laid it all out there in our last episode about how he went from budding doctor to landscape construction entrepreneur. And just to kind of at the end of the podcast last time, Mike, you were talking about how if I were to put it in slightly different words from what you said, you talked about how you loved your work because it was solving these complex problems. And every time you solved a problem, you were able to advance your organization. I believe that you have always done really good work. And so you had this solid reputation. You grew by referrals. But at some point, the business got hit the limit of your own personal capacity to run it. And you talked about the burden of going home and having everything on your back. And how that, you didn't say this, but I know that's relentless. Right? Like there's too many problems to solve, no place to turn. What was your what would you say your sort of level of optimism was at some of those harder points?
Well, my level of optimism at some of those harder points would be like, I am done. Someone else can deal with this. But to be honest, there's two things that kind of brought me back around. One was I'm a husband and a father, and it's my responsibility to take care of them and protect them. And I never wanted my children to ever be left wanting. And so that what kind of brought me back. That was the one thing, and my wife's unfailing support.
And then carry on.
Sorry, go ahead. No, you go ahead, Derek.
So that provided. I'm not necessarily. Maybe we'll get to your wife in a second. I'm not sure that's an automatic formula for optimism, but it's definitely a formula for not quitting.
Well, for me, and we talk about this as a team all the time, is creating that vision, or as you call it, those drivers, right? That at the end of the day, when you can't, at the end of the day, food has to go on the table. At the end of the day, you need a place to live. And that was my level of motivation at times. That's a fact. But what kind of brought me, so that was a foundation. But second to that is I also had a lot of very good people that I work with, and I dreaded ever letting them down. I have a couple, well, more than a couple, a good number of staff members that had sacrificed and continue to sacrifice a lot for Valley Landscape. And the fact that I just couldn't let them down. There's no way I could let them down. And so that when things were hard, that's what kept me going. Was I've always had the attitude, Derek, that if something didn't ever work out, it wasn't going to be because I didn't do everything within my power and to not allow that to happen. There's been many circumstances in my life, whether it's in business or in personal, where something happens and it's like, do I want to look back after this difficult time has passed? And do I want to be able to say, hey, if it didn't work out, I put everything on the table. I put everything on the line. Or do I want to look back and say, oh, but what if? I never wanted to have a what if life. I always wanted to have this was because of something that I did and planned and worked with other people and did my absolute best to solve the problem. And sometimes if that's not good enough, then that's okay. I'm okay with it then, but not if I don't put it all on the line.
So I feel like I should take my question back because when you talk like that, optimism doesn't have to be a factor. Like the sense of responsibility is so great that that's all the motivation you need. Now, you need a little bit more than that because you need your mind to shift to a different place so you can see problems differently and solve them differently. But I just want to sort of highlight the emphasis on responsibility, which is not something that seems to be all that popular these days.
Yeah. Well, Derek, that sense of responsibility, to me, it's like when I like the analogy of looking at a picture, any picture. I think too many times when we have problems, whether it be in life or in business, we get our eyes right up close to that picture where we can't see the whole picture. We're only seeing a small little portion of it. And at times we need to take a step back and look at, so you can see the whole picture, whether, insert the picture to be problem, insert the picture to be opportunity. But if we don't step back to take a look at the whole picture, how do you ever go about solving to get to where you want to be? Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. One of the ways I think about that, and sometimes we talk about working in the business, which is in the day-to-day on the production line, creating value for the customer. And then working on the business, which is stepping back and looking at the system with which we create that value and seeing if there are better ways to set up that or operate that system. And when you're in the system, you can't see the system.
No.
100% you can't see the system.
No.
And so stepping back, you took that opportunity when you stepped back from this business that was a burden on your back. When you stepped back a little bit, what did you see and what was different?
So when I stepped back, I saw what you just said is like I was way too involved in the business. So much the fact that Mike Palmer was the limiting part of the business. Does that make sense? Like I was the constraint of the business in a very real sense.
So I have to say this because this was an insight I got only recently. We talk about the general principle that's discussed in the theory of constraints that management attention is the ultimate constraint of the business. But I also know that there's actually a production flow, and somewhere in that production flow, there's probably an actual constraint of how the value is created. And my realization when I finally got it clear in my head was the constraint of the business, the in the business thing we're talking about, is some physical constraint of flow.
Yes.
And the constraint of on the business is management's ability to pay attention to the right things. So when the guy, the Mike Palmer, the owner, is in the business, you're both. Like
yeah.
People can't make a decision because the boss has to be there to check it. People can't solve a problem because the boss is the only one who knows how to solve the problem. You become the constraint of operating in the business, and that's what was happening, right?
Exactly what was happening. Now, that is a very good summary, and I do want to clarify something though. And you and I have talked about this before. That some people, when they get going on a business, they're like, I don't want to allow myself to get caught working in the business. I just want to work on the business. And I think that sometimes business owners sell themselves a bit short because they've never worked in the business. They don't have the ability to solve problems the way that all somebody else has done is worked on the business. Like, how do you work on the business if you don't know what the business is? So I'm not suggesting, and you and I have talked about this plenty of times, that, I wasn't physically behind the shovel, although I wasn't necessarily in the machine unless I wanted to. And as you know, I love getting in a dozer, or a grader. Like I just, you feel like you're a little kid playing in a sandbox, but yes, that concept of of me becoming was, and that was a very humbling realization to actually have to make and admit to yourself that say, listen, I used to always talk about constraints. What's the bottleneck in the business? And not only to look in the look, and it's like, okay, you actually are the constraint here, Mike, and you need to do something about that if you want to continue to grow. And that's the other thing that, Derek, I don't like to have things just good and steady. And my neighbor, Brent, at my house, he's like, Mike, you just love to make problems for yourself, don't you? He said this to me about 10 years ago. And I'm like, I was a bit taken back by that at first, but I thought, you know what, Brent, that's actually true. But yes, how do you move things forward? And that's humbling, I think, it was very humbling for me to realize, yeah, you know what, I needed to do this for my mental health, for the relationships that I had to do it. I was almost forced into that position, not because of complacency, but because of my attitude that I always want to allow things to grow. Because by all means, Derek, and you know this, things could have just kept going the same. And that, for some people, that's good, but that was not good for me. So,
well, so what changed, or what changed first? So you've stepped back and you've said, hey, I'm so tied up in the business, I'm slowing things down. So what did you change?
I picked up the phone and called Derek Hudson. And if that's what you're asking, I knew I needed help, but I also knew that I'd have to allow myself to be vulnerable. And I just, call it correct or not, I wasn't willing to be vulnerable with just anybody. Exposing yourself takes, once again, is a certain level of humility and courage. And I needed to know who I was going to deal with. And I've known you for some time, and you were having a change in employment. I'm like, oh man, I actually, I'm going to call him. And I think, Derek, you actually called me.
I think I got you first, but we were on the same page right away.
Well, you called me, but I was literally, I'm like, Derek's this former executive and knows all this stuff. And I had always been wanting, like, he doesn't have time for somebody like he's, very nice man, but wouldn't, he's too busy with this important stuff. And I'm not. And then, so we chatted, and then what did it for me was really helping to get this stuff out of my head first. Just talking about it was one, but then coming up with a framework of how to do something about it. And that was really transformational to not only myself, but to the business. Because I still remember as we sat, so we got together as a group, all of my main staff, and we talked about these things of, these are the kind of the valley landscape that we want to build together. And the staff member were all on board. And I still remember feeling when they said, yeah, this is what we want to do too. It's just a huge sense of relief. And I still remember I got quite emotional, because it was like, wow, like these people really are all in with this business. And it has totally changed my perspective since.
So there was one moment when you felt that weight go away.
Yes.
And I imagine you've felt weight again, but it's not the same.
Not the same at all. So it's not the same knowing that somebody's carrying that weight with you. And that's literally, we see if, two people carry 100-pound weight, it's a heck of a lot easier to carry than if just one does it itself. Well, figuratively in business, I believe that's the same as well.
One of the things that I know happened is you've given your team responsibility, but it's not just delegation. It's not just or abdication. You guys are building a system, and your focus now is on what does the system need to do, and how's it going to get set up, and is it working, as opposed to being a cog in the wheel in that system.
That's right, and that's a totally different paradigm, right? First of all, to get to that point of the system, Derek, as you would know, is a lot of work. That's a ton of work to figure out what works, and this system for us is continually evolving. It's not like it's done, but that's where I come in. That's my job, is to, okay, this part of the system isn't working. What do we need to do to improve the system? And the fact of the matter is if I'm not stepped back to look at that, how does the problem ever get solved? So you end up spinning in this hamster wheel without that system, because you don't even know the problem's there. And because you're too close to the picture, if going back to that analogy. And so, yeah, that's been reinvigorating for myself. Is okay, these processes are in place, there's checks in place. I needed to know that hey, I'm willing to invest and trust in these individuals, but I still need to know that it's not just close my eyes and stop. And so I spent a lot of time working on that system and say, okay, this is kind of working, but this needs to be tweaked over here. This is just not working. It needs to be changed altogether. And it's interesting because whenever we have, just yesterday, whenever we've had incidents or problems show up, it's when people do not follow the system. And including myself, if I find myself wanting to, I have a bunch of other things to do, and I find myself wanting to hop in that big piece of equipment because it's just relaxing for me. Like, you cannot do that. You've got to stay focused on what you have to get done. And so yeah.
So you said almost categorically that if a problem arises, it's because someone didn't follow the system.
That's exactly it. And we go through time and time again. It's like, okay, what happened here? Was the process followed? No, it wasn't. And okay, well, it's great because you have that confidence to fall back on it. By all means, there's still some things that arise, and it's like, okay, the framework is that we now need to develop something for that. And I think we've been good too of not, because I do believe that you can overcomplicate the system, right? Where you're sitting there so much, you're running things by a checklist. And I do think there's that fine balance between, okay, we're operating this by checklist versus something that has flow to it, right? You and I have talked about flow. There needs to be good flow to things. And if there's not good flow to things, why is that happening? Well, it could be happening because there is no system process in place, or it could be because the process that's in place is so burdensome that you're looking more at the paper instead of a job site.
That's fantastic. Now, I'm just taken back to your respiratory therapy checklist.
Yeah.
So it's crazy. It's full circle. I think you've taught us an important principle is the checklist or the system has to promote the flow and no more. And,
yes.
and the problem that you had with respiratory therapy, and I've had in my mind with optometrists, because I spent a lot of time in their office as a kid and as an adult, and dentists to a lesser degree, is they know how their days are going to go. They're solving problems all day, but it's kind of within this limited set of variables that they work with.
Yes.
And us business people, that's too constraining for us. We want more variables.
Yes. And Derek, people think that we're somewhat crazy for that mindset, but that really does fuel me. Like I love the challenge of, once again, going back to what did you learn in business school that applies to landscaping? And it's like, I learned a framework that I not egotistically or arrogantly say this, but I just really feel like I have the tools in place to be able to solve problems. And then working with the Unconstrained group, that's just continued to grow. And it's literally reinvigorated me. We had a couple people that were interested in acquiring Valley. I was even like, this is so bad, I'm just going to sell this business. Someone else can deal with the problems. So then now it's like, you know what? If somebody were to want to acquire Valley Landscape, it would have to be a great offer, not just a good offer, because I'm loving what I'm doing again. I feel reinvigorated. I feel that there's not a lot of, there's very few things that aren't fulfilling. I'm excited to go to work. I like going to work. I like seeing the people that I work with, whether it be a person that's sweeping a floor or watering a plant or Tim that's managing all of my operations. I love seeing these people. I love being with them. And having these frameworks in place have really created safety. And going back to those university days, it's really created a framework where it's not a limited thing. Like the principles are in place to continue to grow and continue to learn and continue to overcome those obstacles, not just for me, but for everybody that I work with.
So, Mike, this has been fantastic. Now, I just want to put you on the spot a little bit. So, you build this system over a few years, and you start to get confidence in it. What has that system allowed you to do in terms of growth in your company in the last while?
So, like numbers growth, or
Well, you don't have to share
percentage?
numbers, or you can if you want, but I you've seen you've got a lot more work on your hands than you used to have.
Yeah. So, definitely. So it has allowed us to grow. So our staff has, the number of staff that we have has doubled. Our sales has grown in the first year we started doing this, to be honest, there weren't a lot of tangible results that I could see other than what I felt. And that's what you felt, but like I could feel inside there was a difference. So I look at that as my investment of time. And so for the first 2 years, we were kind of working through things. But this past year, because of the system and framework that we have had in place, has allowed us to take on greater, way, way larger projects. And I believe we can continue to take on those larger projects. And yeah, like it has been an instrumental change, and in my business as a whole, our sales have grown this past year over 50% year over year, and it's only continuing to grow. We haven't had a backlog in work like we have now in probably 9 or 10 years, and that was through COVID as well when things were slow. So our backlog, which is a good thing, is continuing to increase because the amount of work coming our way is significant, and it's great because we get to do projects that are really neat and a lot of fun and challenging. But that's what makes them fun, is that they're challenging, and there's things to continue to work on and to continue to learn and continue to grow.
So, Mike, thanks for this. This has been enlightening and fantastic. In parting, do you have any advice for business owners who feel like they go home with everything on their back?
Yeah, is as scary as it can be to open up to solving those problems. That is exactly what you need. You need to be able to sit with somebody that knows how to, such as the team at Unconstrained, that knows how to strategically work through these things. Because I would suggest that it has to be the right fit with whoever it is that you're working with. And but you have to be able to be vulnerable and humble and agile, aggressive. And I know that those things may seem, how the heck does that work together? But you have to take advantage of the opportunities as they present themselves. And, don't be afraid to ask for help. I think as business owners, we start and it's like, you realize sometimes it's lonely, but there's so many people that want to help. There's just so many people that want to help and want to see your success, even within your own industry. Some great relationships that I have are relationships within our own industry, and we talk about our problems together. Hey, this is what I'm experiencing, and some of my competitors in the industry, we don't. Everything's closed book, closed chest. Now we don't talk about numbers and all that stuff, but we openly talk about the challenges that we're having. So it starts with talking about it, and then having the courage and I guess the willingness and determination to invest in that, because you're not going to necessarily see the outcome of that. Maybe you will. Maybe some other companies are a lot more. You see some of the financial results of that, but even if you can just be able to go home at night and know that you've got a group of people that are carrying that load with you, just knowing that for your own mental health and sanity is worth. How much is that worth? To have improved relationships with your family and friends, and I don't think you can put a number on that. To be able to serve in the community, I don't think you can put a number on that. And to those things to me are the most valuable things, because I always want to be available to help another person, and for me to be able to do that in the way that I want to do it, I need to have space in my mind to be able to do that. And working with somebody like yourself, Derek, allows me to do that. So,
hey, thanks. I think that's a topic of another podcast, but we'll have to arrange that later. Mike
sorry,
Palmer.
I wasn't mean. Go ahead, Derek.
No, Mike Palmer, Valley Landscape. Thanks very much for being on the podcast. I'm happy that you have a team that you can share the burden with. And if we go back to the essential dynamics concept of being on a quest, what an awesome fellowship you've built around you. So I think that makes all the difference in the world. And I've seen your family support up close as well. So pleasure to be working with you and to have you on the podcast. So thanks, Mike. Thanks, Bryn, from Road 55 for making us sound better than we are. And until next time, everyone, consider your quest.
This series is proudly produced by the team at Road 55. Road 55 creates content that connects. For more information, check our website, www.road55.ca.